Button. Whoa, 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 whoa. What are we doing here? Holy crap, Anthony. You didn't tell us we were going to have this conversation. You didn't tell us we were going to have a tough convo over here. You didn't tell us we were going to have a tough conversation over here, Anthony. Ba-boom, ba-bam. That's why we're here, baby. That's why we're here, to slug it out a little bit. You know, I think, look, I know this conversation's kind of come and gone, and I intended to jump into it, but the week that it happened, or the weekend that it happened, I was kind of having a crazy weekend. So I decided to, when I was talking with McFarlane, decided to kind of, maybe it would be a good idea to sort of circle back around it. And, look, I mean, this image has struck up has really struck a chord. This image has really, really struck a chord with people. Not to be a fucking blabbermouth or anything, but are you guys aware of that YouTuber who does reactions? His name is Zeus. Are you aware of Zeus? That guy, he does a lot of hip hop reactions. It's a very popular channel, and his videos are pretty entertaining. Are you guys aware of that guy? He's been doing it for a while. I love Zeus, bro. Yeah. So he, with his friend, I have not met his friend. I didn't know who this was. He literally FaceTimed me in the middle of the night. He FaceTimed me in the middle of the night as I was just finishing shooting a review, and I had no clue who the fuck it was. He FaceTimed me in the middle of the night, and him and his friend were just basically like, "Okay, who should be the fourth on this Rushmore?" I'm like, "What? Excuse me, what? What? Why am I being asked this question? Why this line of questioning in the middle of the night? Like, we never talk." And you're just like, you're hitting me up out of nowhere to have this discussion. Holy shit. We threw a few names back and forth. Look, I want to ask you guys first in chat. Do you, before we get into the fourth, if we're talking about a hip hop Mount Rushmore of the most, consistently creative, but also mainstream and successful artists. If we're talking about a Mount Rushmore with that criteria, again, of the 2010s, do you agree with the three placements that are on this list thus far? I guess is my question. Is question number one. Do you agree with the placement of these three heads so far, or is there one of these three heads that you would remove? J. Cole gotta go? Nah. J. Cole off. J. Cole not sure. Okay, so that's the criteria. Mac Miller with the Willie crack, and yes. Yeah, I mean, I have to... Look, I have to agree with Drake, because Drake is commercially and culturally such a force. Drake is absolutely such a force. Nobody's sounds and styles over the past 10 years, I think, have been copied quite as hard as Drake. Obviously the discography is not as much there as it is with some artists, and there are really obscure underground artists that have far better discographies than Drake does. But do they have the influence? Do they have the impact that Drake does? No. Like, nobody has the impact that Drake does, and nobody will have the impact that Drake does for years. Drake is, kind of once in a generation type artist in terms of like size and influence, in my opinion. So I feel like Drake, as much as some people don't really care for his work, and I don't care for all of it, absolutely deserves a place on this Mount Rushmore. Kendrick, I mean, I didn't give Kendrick a 10 for nothing. And as far as like artistry in the hip hop mainstream goes, I feel like there's not really any comparison. I feel like you can't really, say no to a Kendrick. Kendrick has to be here. As far as J. Cole goes, though, obviously J. Cole does numbers, but I feel like he's kind of lacking on the impact and on the quality discography end. I feel like J. Cole, obviously, he makes better and deeper music than some people, for sure, for sure. But I mean, I think he's kind of lacking on those two ends enough to the point where there are other, I don't take him off of the Rushmore gleefully, but there are other artists of this past decade that I could think of that, in my opinion, I think are more artistically and culturally relevant and have also done fairly big numbers. Now, if with J. Cole off though, if we're sort of accepting Drake and Kendrick here, which that's my own. You guys are free to sort of throw what is your own for, in here. I encourage that. You're allowed to. But starting with Drake and Kendrick, if we were to move on from there, I feel like depending on how strict we're being, like, do you have to start in the 2010s? I feel like that's kind of a limitation that some people are kind of putting themselves to. And when you do that, like, obviously Kanye is totally out of the picture, but I'm not sure if Kanye should be out of the picture. Obviously, Kanye started in the 2000s. There's no debating that. Kanye, as far as like a lot of his commercial success, when he started, what really made him the Kanye he is today, it was totally just all done in the 2000s. But honestly, like, with this decade coming to a close, I feel like 2000s Kanye is a totally different artist than 2010s Kanye. I feel like they're two totally different artists with two different sounds, styles, ethoses. Kanye on in the 2000s and 10s. Yeah, I mean, I feel like, you have to kind of consider Kanye to be in the 10s because even to, this day, I mean, it's like if you're talking about hip hop of the 2010s, you can't not talk about My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, even if I'm not as crazy about it as some people are. Like, you can't ignore the impact of that record. You can't ignore the significance of that record and the impact culturally that it had. The fact that in so many ways it sort of like expanded the hip hop fan base to an audience of people who, pre-internet maybe didn't really have too much interaction with the genre. Honestly, there are a lot of young college kids out there in the 2010s who My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy was kind of like their first hip hop record, and Kanye will forever, sort of have huge impact on the game artistically, not just with his 2000s output, but his 2010s output too. I think Kanye, if you're not limiting it strictly to people who started in the 2010s, should absolutely be on this list. Should absolutely fucking be on this list. Because again, I feel like him in both of these decades are two totally different animals, and he had great output in both of these decades. I mean, I think there's like some room for conversation that his 2010s output, culturally speaking, was more impactful than some of his 2000s output. I mean, honestly, like 808s and Heartbreak certainly sets the stage for a Drake, and a lot of other artists too. But, thinking about the amount of influence Twisted Fantasy as well as Yeezus, and as we continue forward, T-Lop and even Kitsy Ghosts, thinking about the impact that those records are going to have into the future, I mean, it seems like there's even more potential for things to, hey, thank you very much for the sub, to grow and ripple out from there, based on all of Kanye's 2010s output. Now, who the hell knows what this next decade is going to hold for Kanye, but I don't know. As far as like hip hop artists having a great decade, creatively speaking, I feel like you have to consider Kanye. I feel like you can't, throw Kanye to the wolves. So if we're not limiting it just to artists that started in the 2010s, I think Kanye should be on this Mount Rushmore. Now, to move on from there, we have to talk about a placement on this Rushmore for one of the most like prevailing sounds and styles of this past decade, and that's trap. How are you going to have, and obviously, like, all three artists that are on this Rushmore right now have, put out tracks with beats that obviously like dabble in trap music and are influenced by trap music to some degree. But, we need to think about somebody who's like kind of, I guess, there and like specifically there, and not only specifically there, but like, really kind of like expanding the style and pushing it forward and helping to push it into the mainstream. And when I think about that, I mean, there are a lot of names that you could bring up. Certainly one person who I saw a lot of people bringing up in respect to this conversation over here was Future. And, I could sort of see a Future on this Mount Rushmore, maybe. Hold on. I'm doing something silly over here. I'm doing something silly. Bam. Here we go. I'm going to put Kanye right here. Bop, 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 bop. Certainly I've seen a lot of people suggesting a Future for this list. But, but when I think about trap music over the course of this past decade, and, people who helped, I guess, popularize it and creatively expand it, and also, I guess, like kind of represent it with this ethos, because, part of one of the revolutions of, I think, hip hop of the 2010s is that there's been a total upending of, I guess, what are kind of like the creative expectations that it has to be lyrical and it has to sound this way and it has to sound that way. And, there's been a lot of artists who have been super successful that have totally sidestepped that necessity. And for good reason. I feel like a genre shouldn't thrive entirely off of a super strict, rigid set of principles to, prove what isn't good forever. I think certain aesthetics and principles and ideas work for a certain amount of time, and then they should be sort of phased out and changed as kind of new creators and generations come into the fold to, express themselves in different ways. But when I think about sort of like popularizing trap music, advancing it, evolving it, and revolutionizing it, I honestly think about Travis Scott. I do think about Travis Scott because I know he wasn't like the first rapper out there to, make psychedelic hip hop or make, even trap with kind of a trippy edge, because again, you think about Future, or, you think back to a lot of early A$AP Rocky stuff, like the Live Love A$AP mixtape. I would, obviously, those artists should be considered as kind of forebearers, as, godfathers, as people who sort of like laid the groundwork, I think, for what, Travis Scott does. But, it still kind of remains that Travis Scott is the artist that kind of like brought that so far and is having, an incredible amount of like cultural impact with it, to the point where like so many artists out there are trying to copy Travis Scott's fucking sound. Hold on, let me get one more picture over here. Bop, 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 bop. Oh, I'm gonna throw in another one in a second. So yeah, I mean, I think we absolutely have to consider Travis Scott for this Rushmore. I think Travis Scott is worthy of this Rushmore. I think he showed that, not only can he advance trap music to a new place, but you can make a hip hop record, be that Rodeo, be it Astroworld. You can make a hip hop record, have it be, new and bold and creative aesthetically, and not adhere to the necessity for super lyrical this, lyrical that, whatever, but still have it be artistic, still have it showcase artistry, still have it be in so many ways more artistically deep than, some artists out there who are just trying to deliver some grimy bars that we've heard for the millionth fucking time. Travis Scott is really an artist, in my opinion, of aesthetics. And there's a lot of great music out there based almost entirely on aesthetics. I think Travis Scott is kind of that for his own generation. And I think he's kind of proven himself to be, the best, if not one of the best at that. And, hip hop for aesthetic's sake, and especially psychedelic hip hop and especially psychedelic trap, has been so huge, so predominant, especially in the latter half of this decade. I feel like it kind of needs acknowledgement, and Travis Scott is really kind of the, the leader of that sound in so many ways, in my opinion. Now, to throw one more log on the fire over here, if we were strict and we said to ourselves, nope, no Kanye for you, we can have no Kanye, no Kanye, no Kanye at all, because the artists have to have mostly started in the 2010s, at least close enough to the 2010s where, they feel almost like 2010s. Because, if we look at Drake, obviously he dominated throughout the 2010s, but he has like mixtapes that span back to the late 2000s. You know what I mean? So even with Drake in here, it's not even a super strict list. You know what I mean? But still, having said that, I think, another face that we need to consider over here, if we're thinking about artists who have heavy impact in the 2010s, and I think kind of define the artistry and ethos of hip hop of this era, it's got to be Lil B. It has to be Lil B. It has to be Little Brandon. Lil B is kind of the other one in my view that of the 2010s, I feel like he represents so much, because hip hop over this past decade has become so much about just being online, being on the internet, being online, being raw, being weird, embracing the idea of skeptical, and almost like getting at people, trolling, that sort of thing. And, I think Lil B is kind of that guy, and there are artists as well that you could say kind of also represented that in their own way. Tyler, Odd Future. I feel like Tyler and Odd Future, if we had a fifth place, should most definitely be on here. To me, some of the most defining changes in kind of perspective, ethos, sound. Tyler, Kanye's 2010s output, Kendrick, Drake, Travis. To me, those are kind of like the most, I guess, prevalent waves or sounds or, aesthetics throughout this past decade. But Lil B, because he's such an outsider artist, I feel like a lot of people aren't really like aware of how a Lil B like sets the stage for, like a Chief Keef or something like that, or a Tyler the Creator, with Lil B just being out there, being as weird as he is, and coming out with music videos and kind of like the very raw, like in your face, totally unfiltered fashion that he, was in the early 2010s and late 2000s. I think Lil B just like really kind of paved the way for just a lot of these online SoundCloud rappers and just a lot of these just like terminally online artists just in the hip hop sphere. I think Lil B just kind of like laid the groundwork for all of that in his own weird outsider way. And not to be too dismissive of Kanye, I would love to keep Kanye here. And on top of that, again, I think we obviously need to consider Tyler as well, even if I feel like it took him a long time to come into his own musically and artistically. Because, it truly did. But still, even if that is the case, I think the ethos that, punk, DIY, start your own brand, start your own thing, come up with your own style of dress, your own, sort of like weirdo kind of left field, whatever, build your own empire from the ground up, which I think, has kind of been the mindset of a lot of young rappers out there right now. Tyler represents that in his own way. And, I think in so many ways kind of represents the epitome of that. Tyler like really kind of built his own separate thing from the ground up that he's like totally the head of, and just like has so many irons in the fire in terms of like music, visual direction, clothing design, so on and so forth. He's really just like a jack of all trades. He's really just kind of doing it all. Which, you could say Kanye is as well to a degree, but, Tyler, I think, really is just kind of like, ties it all together really well, and, is the total package, and does it, not for necessarily the success of it. When I see Tyler doing it out here, it really just does kind of seem for art's sake. But it just happens to be, successful as well, which I really kind of admire. about his output as of late. So yeah, I mean, I think in total, this kind of would be my little hip hop 2010s Mount Rushmore over here. Honestly, this would be my 2010s Mount Rushmore. And if we were talking just like strictly rappers or whatever, I mean, obviously there's Death Grips if we're kind of like, extending it into the experimental underground sphere, but that's just so kind of outside of the mainstream, you know what I mean? Which Little B is to a degree as well, but even with Little B being as outside as he is, like he's had weird levels of impact in the music world, in the sports world, even though he's like been so independent for so long, he just seems to have these tendrils that kind of dig their way into everything. Whereas, Death Grips kind of in so many ways like revels in their, obscurity a little bit. Whereas Little B just like, again, just sort of seems to have his fingers in it all for whatever reason. It's just kind of the magic of the bass god, I suppose. But Soulja Boy is not going to be happy with it. Well, Soulja Boy was more dominant in the 2000s anyway. So, I mean, although I don't know, like, yes, his fingers and everything. Blah, blah, blah. But, I know Soulja Boy, probably, I don't know if he has any type of feelings against Little B these days, but, Soulja Boy was an innovator in his own way and certainly kind of paved the way for, Lil B. And, as far as like rappers of the 2000s go, like he was very, into online promotion and was kind of taking things in a different way stylistically and aesthetically than a lot of people were. There weren't a lot of people out there. Soulja Boy had some hits back in the day, but honestly, like in the hip hop sphere generally, he wasn't taken very seriously. He was not taken very seriously. He was not taken, he was taken as more of sort of like a fad and a novelty. But, little would we know things like novelty would become so predominant, in just kind of music promotion in general. And Little Boy and Soulja Boy really kind of laid the groundwork for a lot of that. Waka Flocka, like, as far as the trap thing and the revolution that it kind of started in the 2010s, you cannot forget Waka Flocka. Waka Flocka was obviously like almost like the Big Bang in so many ways. Like not the biggest, bangiest bang, because obviously trap music precedes Waka Flocka by years. But Waka Flocka's, Flockavelli just happens to be that record, in the 2010s that kind of blows a lot of people's minds and kind of opens people's heads up to the idea, which is also also has to be greatly attributed to Lex Luger's production. You can't forget his production, because if it wasn't, for his production, you kind of only have part of the equation there. But honestly, like beyond that record, as much as I have enjoyed some of his work past that point, he really failed to, advance that sound and continued, advancing like artistically. You know what I mean? It almost was a bit of a flash in the pan kind of thing, but it was the most flashed pan ever in that it sort of inspired pretty deeply an interest in a sound with a very hyper aggressive presentation of it. With a super simplified, raw kind of demeanor, which you could also argue that Little B was doing that super raw shit before even Waka was. But, obviously he's screaming his brains out and he's going crazy with it. Little B is kind of weird and raw in a different way. It's not perfect. It's obviously, this is as much as I feel passionately about this little setup over here. It's obviously open for debate. So is LP up there for sure? I mean, if we were limiting it strictly to artistry and we're saying, hey, it's just about artistry and that's it, like LP could be in there. I would even just like bump Drake out and I just put Tyler over there. And, there's probably like, I'd throw Death Grips in there and just say, fuck it. And there's probably like 2 or 3 other rappers I'd put in there just for like personal reasons and everything. But if we were talking purely like artistry, LP would definitely be somebody who would have to consider, even though, again, his own catalog spans back pretty far. Mount Rushmore of producers. Oh my God, that's kind of like it's almost a different conversation. It's we need another conversation. We need another stream. Maybe we could talk about it after the Black Midi interview. I think we can do that. But yeah, we'll throw this up on the streams channel. You guys can check it over there. And if you're watching this on the streams channel over here next to my head, it's another video you can check out. Anthony Fantano, you're the best, and we'll see you in the next one.